My name is Victor Fuhrman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. Have you ever sensed things that are apparently inexplicable by natural laws? Do you think you might be clairvoyant, clairaudient, or clairsentient? Are these special gifts unique to some, or is everyone capable of developing and using these subtle senses? My guest this week on Destination Unlimited, Debra Lynne Katz, says we may all learn to develop and embrace our psychic senses. Debra Katz is an accomplished clairvoyant, remote viewer, medium, and energy healer who works for some of the leading business manufacturers, stockbrokers, and whose clientele includes some of the top celebrities in the nation. She's the author of best-selling books, including the landmark The Complete Clairvoyant, a trilogy, and her latest, Associative Remote Viewing, The Art and Science of Predicting Outcomes for Sports, Politics, Finances, and the Lottery. She's also the founder and director of the International School of Clairvoyance. Her website is DebraKatz.com, and she joins me this week to share her path and how everyone can master their psychic abilities. Please join me in welcoming to Destination Unlimited, Debra Lynne Katz. Welcome, Debra.
Thank you, Victor. Very happy to be here.
And thank you for joining us. I think what you're going to share with our listeners tonight is really interesting to them and very important also. So, Debra, for our listeners meeting you for the first time, please share with us your early path and experiences.
Yes. Well, I really attribute my interest in anything having to do with the paranormal with having an identical twin sister. Her name is Amy, and when we were very young, we had all types of experiences together. So these would include being able to hear each other's thoughts and just being anticipating what the other was going to say before they said it, to the point where it almost became a race to vocalize what we wanted to say, or we knew the other would be saying it first and we wouldn't get a chance to talk. We would see the same apparitions in the doorway of my parents' bedroom. And for that went on, I would say, for about 2 or 3 years before we actually shared with each other what we were seeing. So we were able to confirm that we had both seen. It would look like, I guess what people today would call a shadow man, but it would be in an outline of a man kind of filled in with what looked like the snow from the old TV sets. And we'd just have to run past it and then into my parents' bedroom, and then it would disappear. And so I had that experience, not knowing that she was having the identical experience. So we were able to get confirmation early on with these experiences. And we also would sometimes have shared dreams and also be able to tell what the other one was feeling or experiencing at a distance. So when we were just maybe about 12 years old or so, my sister somehow gained access to a library membership within the Theosophical Society. And we were living in Illinois, but we were about 2 hours away from where their central headquarters were located. And they would just send us materials, reading materials, and then we'd send them back. And I guess my mother must have somehow, facilitated that. My sister was more proactive with these things at that age. But so we were reading like the writings of Helena Blavatsky and the other early theosophists. And not that we really could understand a whole lot, but what we gathered was that if we wanted to learn how to increase these abilities, which sometimes I was very interested in, my sister was interested in to a point until she had a couple experiences where she was reading some witchcraft books. And she had one experience where she got in a fight with a friend and essentially put a spell on her from the book she was reading in. And her friend ended up getting very sick and going to the hospital. Now, at the time we were so young, she really thought that she had done this to her friend. And so it had her stay away from these things for a while. For myself, I remember reading somewhere where it pointed out that while it was possible that her spell had created some kind of negative energy dynamic that could have made her friend sick, it might have been a precognitive experience where my sister might have anticipated subconsciously that her friend was about to get sick and go in the hospital, which would have given her the idea to put a spell on her friend, because this was really not the type of thing my sister would do. And she normally was very loving, not vindictive. But that experience scared her so much that it was several years before she really wanted to get back deeply into these subjects. But I continued to follow these theosophical books and that talked about if you meditated, you might be able to expand your psychic abilities. And so, yeah, I would just say that we're now 53 years old, and this has just been a lifetime of exploration and adventure into these areas.
I'm just curious, have you encountered other twins who also shared the abilities?
Yes. Well, I have talked to a lot of twins over the years who say that they have had many psychic experiences together. And a lot of times one twin might be more into the topics and really pursue these than the other twin. But I would say overall, there is definitely this trend. And I believe I've seen some studies that discuss this as well. Not all of them have it, but I would say, in fact, I know several remote viewers and psychics who do have twin sisters or brothers. So there's some connection there for sure.
Now, when you were having these experiences with your sister as children, did you share these with your parents? And if so, how did they react to what you shared?
Yes, my mother was very supportive. I remember her sharing some experiences that she had had. There weren't a lot, but I remember at a young age her telling us how she had been out driving on the highway somewhere in the Chicago area, and there was a disc hovering above the ground. It looked like a lid of a trash can, and it was just hovering in midair. And so she believed that was some kind of UFO sighting. And we would always go to the library every week and check out books. And so, of course, the books we checked out had to do with ghosts. And so we often talked about these topics with my mother. And she would tell us occasionally that she felt like she had some intuitive abilities, although I can't say that we ever really saw evidence of that, but she was fond of suggesting that she might have those. So yeah, she was open to the topic for sure. And then my father was a self-proclaimed atheist, and I don't really remember talking about these subjects with him. He said he worked a lot, and then my parents got divorced at when I was a young teenager. So I don't really remember discussions with him. I know he didn't discourage us. And in my later years, once I got to writing books about the topic, he was very proud of the fact that he had a daughter who had written a book, and he would tell other people about it and, say, oh, you need to talk to my friend over here who has this interest. So it was really nice that, unlike so many other people, I didn't have to hide what I was doing or feel embarrassed or go through all of that, which definitely is something. I have a lot of students where they come from one of the southern states in the US, where their churches have pastors who really don't understand these subjects and just equate anything having to do with the psychic phenomenon. They just look at it as the work of the devil. And then These people just go through so much. They feel like they have to be in the closet about it. And I realized once I started teaching, and early on, I would occasionally try to encourage one of my students to come out of the closet, and just be themselves. And then I would see the implications of that, where they might be shunned by their family members, turned away by their churches. And so really quick, I realized, this is something that has to be an individual choice, because we all end up doing when we pursue what we feel like we need to do in our hearts. Sometimes the option really is to just be out there and let people know and give them the opportunity to decide if they want to stay in our lives or not. But sometimes there's so many implications, and, people want to keep their jobs. They want to stay in their homes, in their communities, and, keep their social structure intact. And so, for those people, it is the right choice to pursue this work, but do it quietly and maybe anonymously.
What advice would you offer to parents of young children who are sharing these experiences?
Well, I would say to look at these as just completely normal and to not make a big deal out of it, because I've definitely seen the implications when parents who are open to this and they get so excited and kind of go like the opposite of what you'd think, instead of the skeptical or fearful parents who tell their kids not to talk about this, as I know you had shared earlier that you had been through as a child. So there's that attitude, but then there's the opposite attitude where people are so open and they almost want their kids to have these experiences. And a lot of times they may think like that their kids are very special because they're having them. And then it creates then sometimes I think the kids grow up not being discerning enough, or kind of seeking the dramatic aspects or the melodramatic aspects of this. So I think it's really important to see this as normal, and then to help your kids to discern, over time, and not that you can always be discerning or always know, okay, was this a psychic experience or was this purely imaginative, or maybe there were other explanations. This is important for parents to help students or help their children think critically. So there's a difference between thinking critically and thinking skeptically and putting a lot of emotion on all of it. So to help them rule out logical explanations first. But I would say, if they feel like they say they saw someone standing at the edge of their bed and they were talking to them and then they disappeared, ask them more questions about it and help them to learn some investigative skills. Okay, were the curtains open? Was there some light coming in that might have cast shadows? Were they hearing someone talking outside their bedroom door? What else could it have been? But having it as a very viable option that it could have also been a spirit. And, let's talk about it and explore this together.
Wonderful. Before we go on with our discussion of psychic development, please share with our listeners about your social work, your victim advocacy, and your doctorate in psychology.
Sure. Well, when I was in my 20s, I started out with getting a master's degree in social work, and I did an internship at the United States Pretrial and Probation Services in Salt Lake City. And then I ended up getting a job as a federal probation officer in around the San Francisco area for a few years. And so I did pre-sentence investigations and supervised defendants and offenders for a while. But at that time, I was also very much, I was going to basically psychic school. I was taking different classes in intuitive development and healing classes. And I was I was really busy. I would do 60 hours of work as a probation officer. And then almost every single night I was going to take classes and practicing. And it changed me so much. I went through such an enormous spiritual transformation that I also went over to the Philippines and visited first and studied with the different energy healers, faith healers over there. And I went through so much personal transformation that at some point, I still remember one day I was just in my office and at the probation office, and I was just like, you know what? I have no interest in this anymore. I don't want to be a controlling factor in people's lives. I completely believe we so much need law enforcement and we need people doing these roles. But I know personally, I want to work with people, but not to condemn them or control their lives. I want to be a positive influence in their lives and devote my time to my spiritual work. And I had absolutely no idea what that would look like or what that meant. But I had a couple of dreams around that time and a couple other, what I'd call spiritual experiences. And so I just walked into my supervisor's office and handed him a resignation letter. And I called it, I was resigning, even though I was now just about 27, 12, by then maybe 29 years old. And, I had this dream job really because it paid so well in the, federal benefits and everything. So my mother was very, very disappointed when I informed her I was leaving my career. I just started and I didn't know what I was going to do. So I decided I was going to move to the Philippines where I could study more with the faith healers and just, see how to get started with my commitment to my spiritual work. With that, I think I had about $3,000 in the bank to my name, and that was it. So that definitely started this whole path and trend that was certainly not easy, but in some ways I feel like I've just almost kind of completed this whole phase that perhaps lasted about 25 years or so.
And what about your doctorate in psychology?
Yes. So I kind of stumbled into doing formal research on remote viewing type topics. After I'd already been studying subjects like clairvoyant reading and healing and energy healing, and I'd written my first 3 books on the subject, and I was teaching, but I was also developing a really strong interest and curiosity about remote viewing methodologies, which we could talk about more a little bit later. But I was very interested in these subjects, and it was funny because I had really hoped that when I wrote my first couple books that actually in my book, Extraordinary Psychic, I had a chapter in there about remote viewing. And as I was writing it, I didn't know all that much about the topic. I just wanted to include a chapter about it, how it came out of the U.S. military programs and U.S. government funded programs, this methodology that was developed by Ingo Swann and other researchers. And it was very different than the other methods that I was already using. And when I wrote that chapter, I thought, well, it would be great if I could meet some remote viewers or maybe get some training. And sure enough, someone read that chapter, and it's kind of a whole long story, but one day I was just doing some practice on my own with some remote viewing targets, and I had just decided I really wanted to get involved in this, but didn't know where to start, didn't know where to get any training. And I just said, what I know to do in life is when you want to make something happen, you just do whatever form of it you can do that. And whatever, if you want to live in a beautiful house, but you have no idea how you're going to afford a house or find a house, well, just go spend some time in any beautiful house. It doesn't have to be yours, but, or go spend some time in a beautiful hotel and picture yourself there. So I was doing that with just practicing some online remote viewing targets. And in the middle of this session, I get a notice the email is coming in, and it's from this guy who has read my remote viewing chapter in my book. He's a plant biologist, and he has a friend who's a medical doctor, and they were inviting me to a free training, remote viewing training, where they were going to pay for the whole thing. And in exchange, they wanted me to participate in their research. So sorry for this long, drawn out story, but that was how I first got involved in remote viewing research. And then we ended up winning an award from the International Remote Viewing Association for our work. And so fast forward about 5 years after that time, I was very engaged in all sorts of research projects. But I really, even though I had a master's degree in social work, that degree didn't really teach me how to do formal research. So I was just getting a little bored in my life and just feeling like it would be really helpful to go back to school to learn how to be a better researcher. And so then I found out that University of West Georgia had a psychology program where if they accepted you, they pay for everything, and they even have you teach intro to psychology classes. And lo and behold, I would never imagined that they would accept me, but they did. And I just received my degree this last semester.
Congratulations. I can't ever imagine you ever being bored with anything.
Well, I get bored pretty quickly, I have to say. But, there's so many fascinating things to explore in life. There really are. And, I think it's just important to always keep learning and growing. And I'm constantly shocked at people even people who are only like 40 years old, who, someone might suggest like, oh, well, why don't you, go back to school or do something that's more interesting to you? And they'll say, well, I'm 40 years old already. Can I really go back to school? And it's like, of course you can go back to school. You can be 90 years old and go back or change whatever you want to do, you can do. That I do not understand that attitude. And I tell my husband that too, because whenever I tell him that there's something I'm interested in exploring, especially after everything he went through with me to get through graduate school, and we moved across country about 3 different times, he is not very enthusiastic about any more school. But I told him just this week, if I'm 53 and I'm going to live until I'm 90 or so, I mean, that's 40 more years. I'm going to just stop learning here? Absolutely. I don't think so.
Let me tell you something. In 2020, at the age of 67, I got my doctorate in spiritual counseling and direction. My wife just enrolled, she's 65, just enrolled for a master's program in public history. You're never too old to go back to school. You're never too old to learn. So you're an example, and we're all examples of that. And I think people should take that to heart, especially in this world that we're living in today. My guest is Debra Lynne Katz. Debra Lynne, please tell our listeners where they can find out more about all of the wonderful work that you do and your offerings.
Yes, thank you. Well, my website is just my name, DebraKatz.com, DebraKatz.com. And that's my website for the International School of Clairvoyance.
And what will they find there?
Well, they will find information about how to develop your psychic abilities. You'll find my class listings, different offerings that my school has. I have several different programs running, and also different opportunities where you could sign up for professional readings or free readings with the students to see what training is all about and how people go about reading other people. And then there's also remote viewing. I teach a remote viewing class, and I have remote viewing practice targets that are free. So there's a lot of free resources, videos, blog posts, things like that.
And we'll be back with more of Debra Lynne Katz after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, OMTimes Radio, IOM FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week, Debra Lynne Katz. Debra, you mentioned going to the Philippines to learn healing. Why did you choose the Philippines, and how did you develop your healing practice?
Yes, well, I had teachers at the time who had been there, and they had experienced some of the different faith healers. And so they took over a group of us, and there was a whole array of healers. Some, they all did laying on of hands. Some did what was called exorcisms. Some did, and it didn't have to be that you were possessed by, like in the Exorcist film, major possessions, but the idea that people have energies in and around them that can be causing them some difficulties. And so some of the healers did work like that, and I witnessed some pretty amazing things in terms of how that went. And then there were also what were referred to as psychic surgeons, and so there's been a lot of controversy around them, and rightly so. But basically, it was the idea that there were some people there that could manifest energy that usually you wouldn't see in physical form, but that they could actually extract this energy from the body, and it would transform into something that could be physically seen and touched and smelled and witnessed. So I have always been fascinated by that topic, whether physical mediumship, mediums that are able to produce physical phenomenon, whether it would be apparitions or voices just suspended in air, or ectoplasma, or just the idea of being able to impact the physical world through mental activity. And I still find that topic more fascinating and exciting than just about any other topic. And so I was very, confused. I mean, there was a whole host of emotions and thoughts when you start to hear about these things and experience some of them, from, doubt, skepticism, confusion, to also at the same time I was having so many amazing personal transformations, and seeing others have that as well through these healings. So I just knew that I wanted to experience and learn as much as I could about this. So that's why I ended up going back there for a year. And I didn't know, none of the healers had formal training programs. That wasn't really what they were about. But I would just go and visit a healer, and I would spend time watching them, talking to the people they were healing, meditating, just to learn whatever I could possibly learn. And I did that for a while. And then I met the man who would become my son's father, Manuel. He was an acupuncturist, and he did not believe in the psychic surgeons there. And so it was this very interesting dichotomy when we actually met at a healer's place. He was doing hot needling on a patient that the healer couldn't seem to help. And so we had very interesting conversations, because here he had grown up with these healers, and but he didn't believe in the psychic surgery part. And as we went along, I discovered that some of the healers, I felt were authentic. Some of the ones that I thought were authentic were not. And then there was a lot of gray area in between. I think sometimes there are genuine healers over there that are resorting to some tricks or deceit in order to draw in tourists and people like that, even though they are also doing authentic energy healing. And there's the whole range on either side there. But so at that point, I stopped visiting with the psychic surgeons because I was getting too confused about what was real and what wasn't. And then we ended up traveling around the Philippines. In the Philippines, if you do not have all the money you need to go into the hospital. So, for example, if you're having a heart attack and you or your family do not bring the money that's needed to pay for the stay in the hospital, even to pay for your IV bags or what goes in the IV bags, then you get turned away. And I know that for a fact because I sat in vehicles with dying people, seeing what we could do with acupuncture or just the energy healing that I had picked up both in the Philippines and then through classes in the United States, and then using my clairvoyance and Manuel using his herbal remedies and acupuncture to see what we could do to save some of these people who were just turned away from the hospital for lack of money. And then we ended up traveling all over the Philippines to communities where people didn't have any other access to medical care. I'm a strong advocate of making use of all medical care in any situation, in addition to healing. But, when sometimes there's nothing else available, and then thank God that healing is available. And I saw a lot of really incredible cures with people who, otherwise were close to having limbs amputated or kidneys failing. And after months, they got better. So that was really my big initiation into the world of energy healing.
You advocate that psychic abilities are not gifts limited to a select few, but that everyone is psychic and may develop their skills. How would someone start?
Well, there are fortunately today so many books on the subject. I've got my own, but there are many more books out there. So you don't need a lot of money to just start to do reading on the subject. And a lot of people just need to be in situations where they get to practice. And then there's very simple visualization techniques. It's really about how do you focus your mind and where do you focus it, and how do you turn down your logic enough so that the intuitive information can flow? And the information can flow through all your different senses. So, for example, clairvoyance is receiving information in the form of pictures or images, or clairsentience is receiving information through your body's sensations and feelings and emotions. So if somebody is feeling sad, you might feel sad yourself, or you could get a picture of them looking sad, or your telepathy, hearing their mind say something, like hearing their mind say, "Oh, I'm so sad. I don't know what to do." You could hear them saying that in your mind, not so much with your ears, but as if they were making that statement. So our psychic abilities allow us to bring in information through all these different senses at any given time, but we grow up mostly learning how to think, and thinking blocks these. Our thinking is usually louder than these very subtle information flows in these other ways. So really there's many different techniques and approaches, and some of them will serve to bring out one ability over the other, but there's not really, in some ways I want to say, it's as simple as that. You just some approaches I think are better, and some are better suited for certain people who already have certain inclinations. But it's not that complicated. It's just then it's necessary to practice, and it is very much a developmental. It's something that develops with both the time and the experience. And I think it's like any learning, it is a process, but then it's also like learning a skill, a musical instrument, a sport. It's doing it over and over again until it becomes second nature. But then you also, I do believe there's something involved where it's almost like building muscles, like our energy field, whether you want to say it's our having to do with our chakras or our auras, or there's this whole spiritual anatomy that will over time shift with enough practice. And I think there's something involved with that as well. Or perhaps you could say, no, in mediumship circles, they talk about power, like holding the power. And I think of it as developing like a strong enough aura and energy field to be able to like handle more and more energy and input. So when people first get started with the simple techniques, some are already kind of more advanced than others just because of life experiences. But then there are some that it's very common, like initially, maybe just to get like a little bit of like a flash of an image, or just like snippets, and the information comes in slow, and you're not sure if this is just your imagination or your psychic abilities. But over time, you get faster and faster, and it gets easier, and you get much more into a flow. And I'll just add to that I have a video, I think it's up on my website, called Psychic Development in Stages. And I say it's stages because, what happens is initially when you first get started, again, it might be slower. It's more all confusing. And unfortunately, there are people that don't understand that if they stick with it for, what happens if you are doing readings for someone, or this is true with remote viewing sessions as well. What happens in your first session is going to be very different than what happens in your 10th session, or your 100th, or your 1000th session. And so people sometimes will just quit after their first attempts because they don't feel like they're so successful, or they compare themselves to others, or how they think others are doing this work. And they just stop, not realizing that if they did 100 practice sessions, they would be in a place that they never imagined in their lives to be, but they'll never find that out because they didn't, stick with it, or in so many cases, not even know how to get started.
You have a wonderful book trilogy. Please tell our listeners about that.
Yes. So I have 3 books that were recently put into a trilogy called The Complete Clairvoyant. And so it includes You Are Psychic, Extraordinary Psychic, and Freeing the Genie Within. And it is a fairly complete collection about how to use your abilities to read people and yourself, heal others and yourself. And mixed in there is the subject of manifesting with the law of attraction, because it's really being able to see energy, change it, manipulate it, create it. All of these topics are very intertwined, and the techniques and approaches all have that benefit of bringing in information. But if you can see information, you can then alter it. And then you can put out new information to help you more create the life, or the things in your life that you would like to be able to bring in and manifest. I do have a couple chapters in those on remote viewing, but then I have a brand new book on remote viewing as well, which I delineate between clairvoyant reading and healing and mediumship as, I mean, those things are similar, but also a little different too. But I delineate between practices that involve reading people versus practices that involve more describing the physical world, like describing locations and photographs and objects. And so for that would fall under the heading of remote viewing, and specifically remote viewing from the historical context of the U.S. military government programs, and that really a scientific approach to this work. And for that, that's remote viewing, and it falls under my latest book called Associative Remote Viewing, The Art and Science of Predicting Outcomes for Financial, Sports, Elections, and the Lottery.
And we're going to talk more about remote viewing in the next segment. But before we close out, I just want to say that I've experienced clairvoyance, clairsentience, and clairaudience. I refer to myself as an éclair.
I like that term.
Thank you. My guest is Debra Lynne Katz. We'll be back with more of Debra after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week, Debra Lynne Katz. Debra, you founded the International School of Clairvoyance. When did you start this, and what are the programs that you offer?
Yes, well, I've been teaching for about 25 years or so, but I formally started the school maybe in about 2005. And I started off, I was doing in-person workshops and then one-on-one training sessions with people and over the phone. And I started to see how well that was working, but I would call people to come in for them to practice on. And at one point, I realized, this seems to work really well teaching in a group format, so then students can practice on each other and have lots of people to practice on each other. And so we started off just doing teleseminar classes, and now we're doing them over Zoom. But so I've been actually doing, we've used different formats before Zoom ever came out, but it was really cool to see most recently how with COVID hit and everything went online, I'd already been teaching that way for years. So it was just a natural, there wasn't really too many changes there, except now I didn't have to explain how it could possibly work, that people could get together and not only learn a skill, but actually form a community together. And I have a lot of students who end up becoming friends, even people across the world, and then they go and visit with each other, having met in our online classes. So that's pretty cool.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. And so I teach 12-week classes. And so I have a few in clairvoyant reading and healing, and then one in mediumship and one in remote viewing. And then I have what I call the master class, where people can sign up for all of them at once and get a major discount on them. And it's nice to have students to work with in all the classes, because we really get to know each other. And then they oftentimes start to be facilitators of the practice groups that I offer all the students and graduates as well.
We touched upon remote viewing in the last segment. Over the past 15 years, Remote viewing has stimulated public interest and curiosity. And your book, which just came out in August, Associative Remote Viewing. What is remote viewing and how do you begin to practice?
Yes. So remote viewing in the way that I'm using it now, of course, people, especially when it comes to anything having to do with psychic work, there's so many terms and it gets very confusing because some people mean one thing, some mean something else. So there are some people who just will use the term remote viewing synonymously with clairvoyance, or the idea that you're going out to get information at a distance, information that you don't have knowledge of right away. But I like to use it within its historical context. And it was a term that was developed by Ingo Swann, Janet Mitchell, Carl Oasis at the American Society, the ASPR, Society for Psychical Research. And this was in really the very early 1970s that they came up with this term. And Ingo defined it not so much as a psychic ability, but as an experimental setup. So what he meant by that is it's the design, it's the outer setup or process by which you would then use your abilities. And part of that process, and what would make it scientific, is that you're not supposed to know very much, if anything, up front about your subject matter. So you're supposed to work in a blind matter. And blind is a term that comes out of scientific circles. So, is the subject blind to the treatment? In this case, is the subject blind to the subject matter? So an example of this would be if I wanted you to go and, let's say I had a missing wallet and I wanted you to go find it. If you were going to be totally blind to the task, I wouldn't even tell you that you were going to go look for a wallet. I would just say, I want you to go look for something. I'm going to give you a random target number and just focus on this number. And I've on a piece of paper written down this number equals the location of my wallet. And then I could just give you that number, and then you would do a session and you would come up with impressions, you'd write them down, you'd record them, and then we would try to match it up with any feedback that we got later on. So that's one form of blinding. But some people would say, well, even if you know that it's a wallet that you're looking for, you are still blind to actually where it is. So that's okay as well. That tends to be how I like to work if I'm helping people find a missing item. But so there's these different considerations in terms of the setup. How are we, in other forms of psychic reading, when I do a clairvoyant reading for someone, I will get with them on my computer. I'm still not knowing very much about them many times, especially if they're a client I haven't met with before. I'm not going to look them up in advance. I may be able to tell what their gender is from their name. You sometimes get a sense of age from their voice, but I'm not going to want to know very much about them up front. But still, I'm still not working as carefully as I would in a remote viewing setup. I might have them ask a question. It's possible we could talk in advance. But my goal in meeting with a person is not to prove that I am being psychic. My goal is to use my psychic abilities to help them and give them information and healing that they seek. But in remote viewing, since it was developed within a laboratory, and it was important to make sure that information was coming from a truly psychic place, these protocols got established to ensure that. And so people that practice remote viewing today are oftentimes trying to adhere to those types of protocols of being very careful. And they do have the advantage too of then, especially if there's a subject matter where you don't really know the answer to, if a person, for example, if you wanted to know, is there life on another planet? Well, if you just said to me, hey, Debra, will you look at Mars and tell me if you see any life there? Well, whatever I tell you, you're probably not going to be able to verify it. And you're going to think, well, this sounds all interesting, but how do I know she's not just making it up or she read it somewhere? But if you gave me instead, if you said, you know what, I have a remote viewing target for you, and I'm just going to give you a target number. I want you to go to the desired location and tell me what you see. If you just give me a target number, for all I know, it could be any location in the world. It could be the US Capitol. It could be a volcano. It could be the ocean, or it could be Mars. So if it was Mars and I start talking about I'm getting a sense of deserty and this red glow, and I'm seeing this group they look like aliens building a building here. You're going to have at least some. You're going to have more confidence that was coming from a psychic place, and that is really what remote viewing is all about.
And we've got a couple of minutes left. What's the difference between that and associative remote viewing?
Well, gosh, associative remote viewing is a rather complex form of remote viewing. It's a process and system that was originally developed to help get information about future outcomes of events such as horse racing, or who's going to win a football game, or what is the score going to be under or over the betting threshold set forth by the casinos. So it's a way to predict, will the stock go up or down? And so what happens is, let's say if you came to me and said, I want to know who's going to win the horse race that's happening, the first race of the day tomorrow, what do you see? If I was going to use just straight clairvoyance, I would just close my eyes and say, okay, I want to see the winning horse. But the problem is, what if there's 10 horses? Horses look alike, right? Maybe the winning horse is going to be a white horse. So that might help if you already know, well, there's 10 horses and 7 are going to be brown and 3 are going to be white. So maybe I've just narrowed it down to 3 white ones. So that would just be straight clairvoyance. But what if the winning horse is going to be brown? And then with clairvoyance, I could still get okay, well, maybe I'm going to see the jockey's color, I see a jockey wearing green. But the other problem is I see a short, skinny guy on a horse. I may be really being psychic here, but all the guys are short and skinny. And, you start to find, and especially if you do this over time, every day, looking at the horses, you're going to start to even your logic will come in, because you might start to get familiar with which horses would be more likely to win. So we need to have a way to bypass that. And with this idea that there's just too many similar repeating characteristics. So with associative remote viewing, you take something that has nothing to do with the subject matter, like a photograph, and of something totally different, and you pair it with the thing that you want to, with the different options. So let's say there were 5 horses. We could take 5 very different photos, like a photo of a garden, a photo of a dolphin, a photo of a train. 3, they have to be different in color, in shapes, in all their characteristics. And then we tell a remote viewer that they're going to describe a photograph that they're going to be shown 2 days from now. And part of the whole setup is that the photograph that they're going to be shown in 2 days is only the photograph that's attached to the winning horse. And so it's already set up that there's a photo connected with each option. We don't know who's going to win, but theoretically, if the viewer is only receiving the photo attached to the winning outcome in 2 days from now, then they could remote view the photo that they're going to be receiving. And let's say they describe a garden. Well, we know only horse 1 was associated with a garden, and that means they're going to receive the photo that's attached to the horse 1 with the garden. So that will give the project manager confidence that it's horse number 1 that's going to win, and that allows them to place the wager in advance.
So they're wagering on the horse with no name. My guest is Debra Lynne Katz. Debra Lynne, please tell our listeners where they can find out more about you and the classes that you have starting very soon.
Yes, thank you. So people can go to my website at debracatz.com. Another way they could get there is letter U, letter R, psychic.com, urpsychic.com, and go to my website and you'll see a whole list of classes, the clairvoyant classes, the remote viewing classes, and a mediumship class that'll be starting next month.
Debra, thank you so much for joining us. You have to come back because there's so much more we have to share in this limited amount of time. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. It's been such a pleasure talking to you.
And thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor, the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.